Whether you are in a dark moment of your life or simply want to expand your knowledge, which is not a given in a time when widespread ignorance seems to prevail, I offer you this comprehensive summary video on absurdism, existentialism, and nihilism. Let's start with the first, existentialism. Life has no meaning a priori. It is up to you to give it a meaning, and value is nothing but the meaning that you choose. Let's delve into Sartre's philosophy, starting from 10 key words or concepts. 1. Existentialism. Sartre stands as a prominent figure in existentialist thought, a movement that burgeoned between the world wars, but significantly marked the post-war era in Europe. Every existing thing is born without reason, prolongs itself out of weakness, and dies by chance. At the core of existentialism lies the assertion of nothingness upon which human existence rests, a void that yields near total freedom but is coupled with emotions such as anguish and absurdity. The concept of existentialism will become clearer as we explore the other 9 concepts. 2. Nausea. As we've mentioned, nothingness forms the basis of existence. This implies that nothing inherently holds meaning in worldly matters. This perception renders life inherently absurd due to its lack of meaning. Sartre dedicates one of his most renowned novels, Nausea, to this theme. The title refers to the sensation the protagonist experiences when confronted with the total absence of the meaning of existence. The pervasive lack of meaning culminates in a discomfort symbolized by nausea. This revelation is experienced as a profound awakening in the novel. Life begins on the other side of despair. In an attempt to shield himself, man seeks to conceal the absurdity of existence through repression. Confronted with this repression, the protagonist undergoes a revelatory experience, realizing that the progression of individual and collective daily life merely serves to mask the absurdity of existence. 3. Condemnation of freedom. Man is condemned to be free, condemned because he did not create himself, in other respect is free. Because once thrown into the world, he is responsible for everything he does. The existentialist does not believe in the power of passion. He will never agree that a sweeping passion is a ravaging torrent which fatally leads a man to certain acts, and is therefore an excuse. He thinks that man is responsible for his passion. Sartre epitomizes the philosopher whose thought is intricately linked to the concept of freedom. However, at least in the initial phase of his work, there exists a negative conception of man and freedom. Sartre posits, man is condemned to be free. His freedom arises from the complete absence of a foundation for things, from the complete absence of any metaphysical entity, or anything that justifies human existence. Man, therefore, navigates within a void. It is within this void that his freedom resides, a freedom so extensive that it is impossible to evade. Hence, freedom is a condemnation because there is no alternative. Man is free in absolute terms, yet he is not free from being free. Each man must invent his own path. 4. Anguish. The theme of freedom is intertwined with our 4th concept, namely anguish. Anguish is also a hallmark of existentialist culture. It is the sensation experienced when faced with the possibilities that unfold before man, surrounding his freedom, but with a negative undertone. Possibility translates into anguish due to the lack of foundation for choices. This brings us to the 5th concept, encapsulated in the phrase, existence precedes essence. Man is nothing else but what he purposes. He exists only insofar as he realizes himself. He is therefore nothing else but the sum of his actions, nothing else but what his life is. This is a famous assertion that Sartre adopts, largely borrowing from Heidegger's philosophy to further elucidate human freedom. With this assertion, Sartre seeks to argue that there is no human essence, and thus no predetermined element characterizing the human being. This implies that we are solely defined by our actions, and that our acts are entirely free. There are three implications of this perspective. Firstly, man is what he concretely accomplishes. His existence is the aggregation of his actions. Secondly, there are no acts that can be categorized as inhuman. Indeed, there exists no human nature, and thus every action carried out by man is inherently human. Thirdly, as Sartre posits, we are alone and without excuses, meaning that we bear complete responsibility for our actions and are always free to choose the path we deem most appropriate. 6. Nullification. In his seminal philosophical work, Being and Nothingness, Sartre delineates between being in itself and being for itself. Being in itself constitutes the entirety that confronts individual consciousness. These are the things of the world, closed in on themselves, yet perceived in their existence by the human consciousness. Conversely, being for itself is the consciousness that apprehends the world around it. A conflict arises between being in itself and being for itself, because worldly things fundamentally lack meaning, whereas the consciousness of the individual inevitably seeks to attribute meaning to them. In this sense, consciousness effectuates a nullification, effectively negating the senselessness of things. 7. Failed God. Man is a failed God. Sartre adopts the quintessential concept of existentialist culture, man as a being in constant projection. Through his projects, man intersects with being for itself. This is precisely what we've previously termed modification. Sartre designates imagination as man's faculty to imbue meaning into the things of the world, thereby making them tools of his projects. In this sense, Sartre underscores man's absolute freedom to pursue projects and nullify being for itself. However, simultaneously, the philosopher highlights how these projects inevitably encounter failure. From this perspective, Sartre characterizes man as a failed God. Whereas God perfectly realizes his projects, man falters. Thus, the things of the world do not fully conform to man's aspirations. Consequently, man's projects are marked by the concepts of postponement, delaying projects indefinitely, and failure, the unsuccessful or incomplete realization of expectations. 8. The gaze of others. We only become what we are by the radical and deep-seated refusal of that which others have made of us. Just as the consciousness of self nullifies being for itself, our consciousness negates the consciousnesses of others. Moreover, the consciousnesses of others do not constrain our consciousness. Rather, we attribute to others a meaning consequential to our projects. In this sense, others become objects of our aims. Sartre simplifies this condition with the expression, "hell is other people," signifying that others act upon us, wielding their complete freedom of imagination and attribution of meaning. Consequently, Sartre speaks of the sensation of shame when we feel the gaze of others, which, by acting upon us, becomes an object of their project. 9. Death. Several hours or several years of waiting, the death is all the same when you have lost the illusion of being eterna. From what has been revealed thus far, Sartre maintains a pessimistic view of the human condition. In this perspective, whereas Heidegger attributes at least a positive value to death, as the prospect of death allows for authentic life choices, Sartre denies even this dimension. Death purifies man. Man is possibility, while death is a necessity that eradicates possibilities. Furthermore, death renders human existence even more absurd, nullifying its existence and thereby further highlighting the absurdity of the choices made. 10. The ethics of responsibility. From the Second World War onwards, Sartre's thought undergoes a partial shift. The pessimistic view of human freedom is reevaluated from the standpoint of choice and responsibility. On the literary front, this shift is epitomized by a brief text published in 1946, Existentialism is a Humanism. In this discourse, Sartre contends that human freedom is always accompanied by the responsibility of choice. One should commit no stupidity twice. The variety of choice is, in the end, large enough. Transitioning from a purely individualistic perspective of freedom to a collective one, man's resistance occurs in tandem with that of other men, so every individual choice has a collective repercussion. We are always responsible for what we have not managed to avoid. In this sense, Sartre argues, we are always accountable to the world. The notion of not choosing, according to the philosopher in this context, is a mere illusion. What appears as a non-choice actually corresponds to the choice of letting others decide in our stead. From this vantage point, Sartre reclaims the absurdity of existence through the ethical value of choice. It's true that you're not responsible for what you are, but you're responsible for what you do with what you are. Moreover, it is this line of thought that makes Sartre one of the most politically engaged intellectuals in the decades following the Second World War. Sartre is always involved in the political situation. He cannot, in fact, refuse the ethical commitment arising from it. Having gained an understanding of Sartre's philosophy and existentialist perspective on the meaning of life, you might want to explore Absurdism and Camus, essentially seen as the natural progression of existentialism. I might not have all philosophers at my fingertips, but let me tell you about Camus. His words hit differently, delving into the absurd, freedom, madness, and the meaning of life. Genius thoughts aren't microwave ready. Stick with it, and you'll see the brilliance unfold. Ready to dive in? In the midst of winter, I found there was, within me, an invincible summer, and that makes me happy. For it says that no matter how hard the world pushes against me, within me, there's something stronger, something better, pushing right back. Albert Camus is often considered one of the emblematic figures of the philosophy of the absurd, a movement of thought that explores the paradoxical and bewildering nature of human existence. Camus' philosophy of absurdism is best captured in an image, that of the Greek mythological figure Sisyphus. Sisyphus was the founder of the Greek city of Corinth. He was known to be the craftiest of all humans, and craftier than Zeus himself. When he was sent to the underworld, he managed to trick his way out. In some stories, he tricks Thanatos, in other stories, Hades, and in other stories, Persephone. He escapes and returns to the earth and revels in the pleasure of the world before eventually being returned to the underworld, where he is punished to roll a boulder up a hill and watch it roll back down again, at which point he returns to the bottom of the hill and repeats the process quite literally ad infinitum. There's 3 reasons why Sisyphus is Camus's icon of absurdism. 1, there's his love of life seen by his cheating his way out of the underworld and returning to enjoy the pleasures of the world once again, which is strongly antithetical to the life-denying brand of nihilism. 2. A second reason is Sisyphus's punishment, the absurdity of rolling a rock up a hill only to see it roll back down again and being forced every time to roll it back up again, knowing the inevitable outcome. Sisyphus is stuck in an eternal cycle of absurdity. 3. The third reason Sisyphus is Camus' embodiment of absurdism is that he is a rebel. He outwits death and the gods to return to life. He rebels against the fundamental order of things. He rebels against the gods. All of these points come together in Camus' great line that closes out his book. I leave Sisyphus at the foot of the mountain. One always finds one's burden again. But Sisyphus teaches the higher fidelity that negates the gods and raises rocks. He too concludes that all is well. This universe henceforth without a master seems to him neither sterile nor futile. Each atom of that stone, each mineral flake of that night-filled mountain in itself forms a world. The struggle itself toward the heights is enough to fill a man's heart. One must imagine Sisyphus happy. And so absurdism is not about finding a meaning to life, but about rebelling against the absurdity of life. It's about standing aloof of the demand to find a meaning, rebelling against the absurd game itself, and affirming life for what it is. It is to struggle with integrity, because this struggle towards the heights is enough to fill a man's heart. Faced with the crisis of meaninglessness that nihilism presents, the absurdist doesn't throw a tantrum and kill themselves. The absurdist doesn't grab onto the nearest life raft and commit philosophical suicide. The absurdist affirms the struggle and enjoys life for what it is. One must imagine Sisyphus happy. This endless cycle symbolizes the futility of our efforts and the endless repetition of our actions in a world that seems indifferent to our aspirations. The image of Sisyphus thus represents the human condition where we face seemingly insurmountable challenges and obstacles, and where our actions may seem vain and meaningless. So, despite our efforts to find meaning in our existence, we are confronted with a universe that remains indifferent to our quests for meaning. However, even in this recognition of the absurdity of life, Camus does not preach despair. On the contrary, he suggests that we can find a certain kind of freedom in accepting this absurdity. Camus sees hope in absurdity. He asserts that if life offers no pre-established meaning, that's precisely where our freedom lies. We have the power to create our own meaning, regardless of how arbitrary or subjective it may seem. He tells us that in the absurd, life itself has no meaning, but each individual can give it one. In his reflection, Camus proposes three fundamental attitudes towards the absurdity of life: suicide, faith, and acceptance. He categorically rejects the first, suicide, deducing that it brings no more sense to death than to life itself. In this regard, he wrote a brilliant sentence: "Should I kill myself or have a cup of coffee?" The absurdity of the world may sometimes crush us under the weight of our problems or the lack of meaning, but a cup of coffee can make it all fade away, keeping us anchored to reality. Likewise, he dismisses the path of faith, considering submitting to dogmatic beliefs as giving up our ability to reason for ourselves. For Camus, accepting the absurdity of life is the only viable path. It is by fully recognizing this disconcerting reality and choosing to confront it with courage and lucidity that we can find true value in our existence. By embracing absurdity, we affirm our freedom to create our own meaning and to live authentically. This message resonates particularly in our modern era, where we are often overwhelmed by an excess of choices, distractions, and information. In this context, Camus' philosophy offers a compass to navigate the complexity of our world. By accepting life, we can free ourselves from the constraints of uncertainty and anxiety. Albert Camus wrote, "In the depths of winter, I finally learned that within me there lay an invincible summer." In absurdity, there are two fundamental aspects to consider. On the one hand, there is the unstoppable desire of human beings to seek meaning in their lives, a perpetual quest rooted deep within our nature. This aspiration is often described by Camus as an invincible summer, a season of warmth and light where the human soul burns with an intensity of desire for meaning and understanding. On the other hand, there is the relentless reality that the world itself seems to offer no intrinsic meaning. It's as if we are faced with a heart of winter, a season of cold and desolation, where the absence of meaning seems to envelop the universe in relentless coldness. In this apparent void, individuals often find themselves lost, desperately seeking an anchor in a bewildering world. It is precisely when these two forces, the invincible summer of the desire for meaning and the heart of winter of the lack of meaning, collide that the absurd is formed. In this state of absurdity, individuals may find themselves as entire universes unto themselves, isolated in their inner struggle between the desire for meaning and the reality of the world. This poignant image illustrates the depth of the human condition, according to Camus, where each individual is confronted with their own version of the absurd, navigating through the tumultuous waters of existence with only the fragile light of their own consciousness as a guide. Therefore, in the philosophy of the absurd, we are invited to contemplate the depths of our own condition, to recognize the duality of our desire for meaning and the often senseless nature of the world around us. Albert does not urge us to recognize absurdity by not desperately seeking meaning in external structures of society, in our relationships with others, and even in the events of our daily lives. It is by exploring our thoughts, emotions, and experiences that we can progressively develop an authentic sense of ourselves and the world around us. You will never be happy if you continue to search for what happiness consists of. You will never live if you are looking for the meaning of life. Engaging in this inner search, we discover our true passions, our deepest desires, and free ourselves from the chains of external illusion that hold us back. By connecting to this inner core, we find a source of strength and resilience that allows us to navigate through the challenges and trials of life with courage and determination. This is particularly crucial when we find ourselves facing extremely difficult moments in our lives. By staying connected to our inner being, to this invincible summer, we can pass through these trials without losing our essence, without being overwhelmed by despair or disillusionment. Camus tells us, "The consolation of this world is that there is no continuous suffering. One pain fades away and a joy is reborn. Everything balances out. This world is compensated." The moments of trauma in our lives are tests through which we all pass at some point, and they can take different forms and intensities, whether it's losing a job, going through a divorce, or the death of a loved one. These events confront us with the fragility and absurdity of life. When we find ourselves in such situations, it is natural to feel a sense of loss of control, loneliness, or uncertainty. It is in these moments of despair that we fully realize the absurdity of life, how our plans and aspirations can be swept away by circumstances, often without warning. However, it is also in these moments of discomfort that an opportunity for rebuilding and giving meaning to our lives lies. By accepting the absurdity of the situation, we are liberated from illusions and expectations that can hold us prisoner. We then have the opportunity to construct our interpretation of events, to find meaning and direction in apparent chaos. Camus tells us that despair is the absence of faith in the future. He also tells us that despair is a form of suicide. Rather than succumbing to the temptation to curse our fate and lose ourselves in self-pity, it is essential to step back and find a constructive way to address our pain. One of the keys to overcoming these moments of crisis is to spend more time in solitude, away from external distractions, to reflect deeply on our existence, making peace with the past and accepting that it cannot be changed is an essential first step towards healing and personal growth. Camus tells us the true generosity towards the future lies in total gift to the present. Albert Camus developed a vision of freedom and action that emphasizes constructive rebellion and affirmation of life. For him, freedom is not simply a state of comfort or satisfaction, but rather a state of constant rebellion against forces that seek to alienate or oppress us. The only way to deal with an unfree world is to become so absolutely free that your very existence is an act of rebellion. He firmly believed that to truly change the world and live an authentic life, one must be in a state of perpetual rebellion, by giving everything of oneself in every present moment. Being a rebel means, for him, being aware of one's values and beliefs, and being ready to actively defend them, even when it means opposing social norms or established conventions. I rebel, therefore I exist. Camus also rejects the idea that ends justify means. For him, betraying one's current self for a future self, or for a hypothetical cause, is a form of dishonor to oneself. By following one's values in life, leading a life of integrity, one's self-esteem and pride are elevated, giving meaning to one's life. Camus tells us, the essential thing is to live well, to live fully, to make life last, and not to say that life is beautiful. Now that we have analyzed absurdism and existentialism, let's move on to nihilism. But to understand the philosophy of Nietzsche, we must first start with his life. And let's change our tone as well, because with nihilism, we are talking about the destruction of all Western values. Let's begin.
What connection exists between Sisyphus and the interpretation of Nietzsche's works in an aphoristic or almost prophetic manner? In actuality, Nietzsche was not a prophet. While it is true that he penned aphorisms, he did so due to his visual impairments. After approximately 20 minutes, he would be unable to continue writing due to a progressive paralysis resulting from syphilis. The disease was contracted when his companions took him to a brothel during his school days, and he felt so disgusted by that experience that he threw himself onto the piano in the establishment's hall, exclaiming, "This is the most human thing in this place." As a consequence, he contracted syphilis, a condition for which there was no cure at the time, as a small amount of antibiotics would have sufficed. Sadly, they were not accessible, causing the disease to progress to his brain. When the infection reaches the brain, it initiates paranoid and terrifying episodes. Nietzsche was born in 1844. His father was a Protestant pastor, so he was exposed to that whole world of reference to God from a young age. Little Nietzsche was already a genius because at the age of 4, on the occasion of his father's death. authored a 2-verse distich declaring, "A good man was laid to rest, but to me, he was a Superman." At 4, the idea of the Superman began developing within him, a notion later exploited by the Nazis for their twisted ideologies. We shall soon explore why and by whom this Overman concept was influenced. As we will see shortly, this Overman transcends conventional Western thinking, surpassing its norms, its established logic, its scientific advancements, and its religious constructs. Departing from truths, deities, sciences, and Western philosophies is the essence of this Overman. In continuation of his life narrative, Nietzsche found himself enamored with Lou Salome, albeit without success. Interestingly, Salome initially crossed paths with Nietzsche, followed by Rilke, whom she genuinely fell for, and eventually Freud. Back then, it seemed quite effortless for a woman to encounter these illustrious figures. Consider Schopenhauer as Nietzsche's mentor, whom he later disavowed. Nietzsche exhibited an erratic writing style, churning out nearly a book annually, showcasing an innate flair for artistic expression and unparalleled analytical prowess. Friedrich Ritschl, a preeminent philologist in Europe based in Basel, recognized Nietzsche's burgeoning talent. Impressed by a 20-page essay sent by Nietzsche, Ritschl extended an offer for Nietzsche to teach philology at Basel. Without completing his academic pursuits, Nietzsche assumed a professorial role 3 years into his studies. The narrative takes a grim turn as Nietzsche's sister, upon his mental breakdown in 1888, callously exhibited him for public viewing on a bench in their home for a fee. The scene of one of history's greatest thinkers huddled, serving as entertainment for his heartless sister, evokes a deep sense of unease. Following his passing, she meticulously gathered and amalgamated his unpublished writings into a unified manuscript titled The Will to Power, subtly altering the content to align with an emerging Nazi ethos, which was yet to take tangible form, but loomed in the cultural domain of early 20th century Germany. For example, where it said who the Overman is, she changed it to We are the Overman. It is also because of this that Nietzsche became the icon of Nazism, of fascism in the 1970s. Entering deeply into the two works, Nietzsche destroys Western philosophy, beginning with the creator and greatest figure, Plato. He accomplishes this, as mentioned, with a hammer. Philosophy should be executed with a hammer. Initially tackling Platonism and logic, followed by Christianity, viewed by Nietzsche as a simplified Platonism rather than a religion. Nietzsche, as stated earlier, disassembles Western philosophy through a strict methodical approach and with the hammer, which involves this. Rather than following Plato's approach of questioning, what are things? What is reason? What is truth? What is good? What is just? Nietzsche argues against this, suggesting not to ponder on what a thing is, as doing so would already present an advantage to the definer. Instead, one should inquire, how did this thing come about? Why was there a necessity for the emergence of a god? What drove the inception of reason? When discussing the origin of reason, his response is, by coincidence. We are urged to explore this randomness and ascertain the circumstances that led to this thing's genesis, rendering futile the debate on the existence or non-existence of God because the concept of God arose, signifying a need for it, a requirement people had for this concept, and why did they require it? Because only what is constant, what is unchanging, what is static, what provides assurance, forms the foundation for leading a life. If an idea functions in terms of stability, it is deemed truthful, but this idea is not inherently true. It is perceived as true merely because it is effective. Truth is solely defined by the efficiency of its operation. So where does reason come from? Nietzsche argues that this idea of reason came into being because there was a danger. If reason was not invented, we would have fallen into disaster, perhaps into the extinction of a people. This is the necessity that induces the invention of reason. And where does this necessity come from? It comes from the tragic condition in which the Greeks found themselves. Why the Greeks and not other peoples? Because, Nietzsche rightly says, the Greeks are the only people who had the courage to face pain. It seems like a trivial matter, but the Christians did not have this courage. Why? Because they faced pain by thinking of healing or salvation in view of something positive. No, the pain, the one for which there is no remedy, the one for which the Stoics say, endure, abstain, endure it, and refrain from putting it on display. They had the courage to face pain. And what is this pain? Pain is death. Men die like animals, like plants, and they know they have to die. But they took this thing seriously. Why do we die? Because we are elements of nature, elements of the species, which can survive only if individuals are born, grow, generate, and die. There is the definition of the rational animal. But for Nietzsche, this is an incorrect definition for two reasons. We do not have the animal instinct, but we have the awareness of having the same destiny as the animal, that of having to die, while the animal does not know this. Consider the herd that grazes in front of you. It does not know what yesterday is, what today is. It leaps around, eats, rests, digests, leaps again, and so from dawn to dusk and from day to day, briefly connected with its pleasure and pain, attached, that is, to the moment's stake. Therefore, neither sad nor bored. Seeing this hurts man because compared to the animal, he boasts of his humanity and yet looks with envy at its happiness. Because this alone desires it, to live like the animal, neither bored nor among sufferings, and yet he desires it in vain because he does not want it like the animal. With these words, Nietzsche indicates a deep inner division within us, a concept the Greeks understood well. We serve as representatives of the human species, following nature's cycle of birth, growth, reproduction, and death. Yet, there exists within us an ego that craves to give meaning to its existence. We often ponder the purpose of our lives and the significance of our time. This pursuit of meaning stems from the self's desire for a purpose, a mission to fulfill. Thus, a conflict arises between our role as mere embodiments of the species, bound by mortality to ensure its continuity, and the human ego's aspiration for significance in the face of impending death, which threatens to render all pursuits futile. Nietzsche refers to this conflict as the incipit tragedia, marking the genesis of tragedy. Having dismantled Western philosophy rooted in Platonism and dismantled reason, Nietzsche now turns his attention to religion. Enter the famous phrase, "God is dead." To declare God dead implies that he was once alive and that the world operated according to his will. Indeed, the idea of God was not only alive, but also influential, shaping historical epochs like the Middle Ages, the Renaissance, and even the French Revolution, which by then no longer required the overthrow of religion, as Marxism did. The concept of God has been a potent force in organizing the Western world. Asserting that God is dead signifies that the world no longer centers around him. It signifies the death of a worldview that no longer functions, generates, or produces tangible effects. Without God, we would be incapable of understanding crucial aspects of history, such as the imagery of hell, purgatory, and paradise depicted in literature. Removing God from contemporary discourse, however, does not render the world incomprehensible. We would still grasp its essence. If we were to eliminate the term God from contemporary discourse, it would not hinder our understanding as it would if we removed words like money or technology. Yet, God's absence from the contemporary world signifies a shift away from a worldview where God was central, a worldview that once underpinned Western values. Having deconstructed Western philosophy, reason, and Christianity, Nietzsche proceeds to dismantle science. When science makes a discovery, it proclaims it as a scientific truth. Nietzsche likens science to children playing a game of hide and seek. It conceals something behind a bush, then searches for it, and finds it. But did science itself place that discovery behind the bush in the first place? This is how Nietzsche views science. Initially, I propose hypotheses. Then I subject nature to an experiment. If the experiment validates my hypotheses, I adopt these hypotheses as natural laws. But what do I apprehend? Nature itself, or my interpretation of nature based on my hypotheses? Science acknowledges that it does not assert absolute truths. Scientists understand this. It's we who often overlook it. Science refrains from declaring its findings as truths. Rather, it terms them as accuracies. Science communicates only precise information, not absolute truths. Accuracy denotes derived from the hypotheses I posited. Depending on my perspective, I yield corresponding results. Science does not pronounce truths. It articulates accuracies. At this juncture, Nietzsche has deconstructed reason, truth, religion, and science. These four elements constitute stabilizing structures that furnish us with order. They enable our existence, and from this standpoint, they fulfill a largely constructive role. Therefore, Nietzsche neither rejects nor disparages these structures he has dismantled, as an atheist might do toward God. Instead, Nietzsche asserts, do not assert that these are bastions of truth. They serve a functional purpose. Inventing reason, God, and science served practical ends. However, what reason purports, what God proclaims, or what is articulated in the name of God, and what science communicates, cannot be unequivocally termed as truth, and thus begins the era of nihilism. There is no purpose, no answers to the whys, as the values rooted in religion collapse due to the death of God. Consequently, morality, good and evil, become indistinguishable once they crumble. In this scenario, there is no purpose, no future. The absence of a future implies that if there's no future, the significance of the present also diminishes. Because without a future, even the present loses its meaning. Why should I be just? Why should I be good? If these actions don't impact the future, in that eschatological future that looms before me as the end of the world and the settling of all scores, there is no purpose. Thus, there is no answer to the why. Why am I in the world, and what am I doing here, if my existence is confined between a random birth, because that's what our birth represents, one in millions of possibilities, and a death ordained by nature? The death of God is no trivial matter. Nietzsche announces it vehemently. When I hear Nietzsche being labeled as a nihilist, I wonder, do those who say this actually read his books? He's not a nihilist. He heralds nihilism as a consequence of the death of God. The world crumbles, that world. The individual who emerges from Platonism is one who has transcended the dichotomy of good and evil, convinced of the demise of God and the futility of the quest for meaning. It's not about truth, but rather about the arrival of a new kind of person, an overman, who diverges from the Platonic archetype. Nietzsche depicts this figure as a camel bearing the burden of morality, then, in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, evolving into a lion to confront the truth, and ultimately a child when the world reveals itself beyond reason, exposing all things as illusions. We must learn to live knowing they are illusions. Only the overman can achieve this.
Now that we have a clear understanding of the three philosophies, you can delve deeper into a comparison between the two most popular philosophies at the moment, Nihilism and Stoicism.